Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo and welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our mission is to figure out the advances and generally where smart buildings are headed. And so we do that every Monday, or most Mondays anyway. Just in case you wonder who we are listed on mondaylive.org. Head over there. And just to point out that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. So just keep that in mind. And let's do keep the questions and comments flowing on Zoom chat. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And also this slide deck is available on mondaylive.org, just in case you want any of the links that's on it. This is the last Monday of June when we have been talking about networks, specifically what makes a smarter network. So this is our final week for that. So our agenda, our normal chit chat, and then we get into the networks discussion, and we really want to talk about where the future of networks is going, specifically for buildings. And we've had a lot of interesting discussion. Let's try and see if we can see some kind of path for the future. Before that, some programming notes. We're going to be dark next week on July 3rd for Independence Day. So happy Independence Day for next week, in anticipation for that. The July's theme is still being worked on, but it's basically around the concept of disruption in this industry. So that's going to start on July 10th for the rest of July. And then in August, we're going to be dark all month for a summer break. So we all deserve a summer break. So see you on the beach somewhere. And we will return after Labor Day, which is Monday, September the 11th. So with that, let's get Ken started with an update from you, Ken.
Okay, thank you very much. I just noticed this post from BACnet and Symmetrics that the standard is online for free of charge now for folks to poke at. So I provided the link to the LinkedIn file on that. I also see that Audrey has changed jobs and she's now the global marketing manager for sustainability and smart manufacturing within AB&B. And I know we always feel bad when we lose somebody from our industry, but I see it as a very positive thing. I see it as this is the way we grow, and this is the way we get our messages spread, and this is how we learn new things. So I think she's been 4 years in our industry. It'll be great to see what she can bring back. She's said she'll stay on as a contributing editor. I'm pleased to have her there. If you click on her website, Energy Girl, you can see what she's talking about, and interesting information and good cross-pollination. This is from another one of our sponsors, Buildings IoT, and they are making us aware of this ESG decarbonization forum that's happening at Dana Point. And I like the words ESGs. ESGs is no longer a debate, but a crucial investment and risk management principles. I think it's kind of, since we started talking about it, it's definitely become a thing. So that's good. So my new word for today was one I had not heard. It's been around for a while, but somehow I had never kind of read through the thing, and it's shardware. And basically it's the combination of hardware and software. And I think it's kind of quite applicable to our industry as we're pretty hardware orientated, and we've been augmenting it with software, but now I think we're starting to see new hardware that is actually shardware, that the software and hardware are so meshed together that neither one of them can stand alone. So that's an interesting thing. And the actual declaration that I work in shardware, I thought that would be great for an elevator conversation starter. The other one is it's tomorrow, I think it is the Young Professional Summer Series with on AI, and I'm looking forward to having some of folks be part of that and report back to me. So I'm hoping that'll go well. The other one, the navigation of the future of smart buildings by that's an interview with Eric from Control Trends and our contributing editor Nicholas, and he's got some interesting ideas there. It's if you've got the time, it's a podcast. You can turn it on while you're driving somewhere, and I'm sure you'll have some opinions about it, either positive or negative, but it does herald the change. The other big optic I think we've got going is finally we're starting to turn the issue around, and we're starting to get some younger faces on it and some younger input. So I think that's a bonus. And thank you for everybody that has been supporting and getting this information. Back to you.
Thank you, Ken.
Anto, just a quick comment on the ESG. I was reading an article today from that mentioned that Larry Fink from BlackRock is no longer using the term because he feels it's gotten weaponized. And I know it's been a lot of pushback from certain circles, and he's responding to it in part. He still believes in conscious capitalism, but is refraining from using the term ESG. And as I think most of you know, BlackRock is one of the largest holders of buildings and other properties in the world. So
that'll be interesting when he has to file an ESG report to the SEC.
Right.
It'll just be a report, right?
Yep.
Well, actually, along the similar line to that, where am I? I came across this piece in the Hill, which is really sort of kind of in the same area. It's sort of identifying the conflict between using ESG to sort of shape your opinion of a company, especially if you're a fund manager like Larry Fink. And the argument here is that doing so may actually be counter to your fiduciary duty, which is totally for increasing capital or increasing the value of capital. So that's kind of an interesting read. I'm not sure whether it will go anywhere, but there you go. The other piece here is just another update from IoT analytics about just the cloud. We've been talking a lot about the cloud. Obviously, the big three, AWS, Microsoft, and Google are right there. Pretty consistent, other than slight inconsistency in the Google numbers between, I think this is their, there's a difference between their calculation of their project versus public projects. And they attribute that to the fact that Google targets typically smaller organizations and AWS and Microsoft target typically bigger organizations. So just some interesting stuff there. And the other thing is this thing that, thank you, Tristan, who's in the audience, sent me just now, which is just sort of a calculation that we actually need to retrofit a lot more buildings than we are currently doing at this. We're currently doing about 1% retrofit, and they calculate that we need to do at least 3 to 3.5%, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's 3 times as much as what we're currently doing. So I know we talk a lot about new build, the only sort of place to feed sort of capex driven technology, but this may sort of open things up a little bit more. Other than that, as Ken briefly mentioned, the C4SB Young Professional webinar is tomorrow. This is the link that's on the screen here. I'm actually going to put it in chat so that you all have it, except that I need to do it for everyone. Let me just do that. There you go.
Just a side note to check, I just registered and tried to add it to my calendar and did not receive the email that was promised. I don't know if there could be a little technical issue there perhaps, or just something on my side.
Okay. Well, thanks for the report. If somebody is going to go down that path, if you could register and just sort of chime in maybe during the show it's a Tracy issue or if it's a different issue. So thank you, Tracy.
Actually, Monica just responded on chat.
Good. The links as always on this deck. And before we move on, any other thoughts anyone want to bring up?
Yeah, interesting one is that Portugal is the latest country to try out a test of a 4-day week. So they're saying about nearly 40 businesses are participating in a government-funded pilot for a 4-day week, and they're kind of joining the other countries that are doing it, are Iceland, Wales, Japan, New Zealand, Ireland, Scotland are all beginning to try. And it's like they're calling it 180-100 model where 100% of the workers get their pay, full pay, but for 80% of the time, but they've got to promise to deliver 100% of their usual output, so, but working on 4 days. So it's interesting trend. You add that to hybrid working and stuff, you just begin to wonder how much commercial office space really will be needed as we move along.
Interesting. Just work harder, work 20% harder, right? 25% harder.
Yeah, but it's like I've always talked to my kids about doing degrees. Do they really need 3 years to do a degree? Because the first year is just messing about, and you could probably do it in one, and probably the same as your day's work. How much time is spent looking at other stuff if you were focused?
Okay. Any other thoughts? All right, so talking about smarter networks, I'm going to bring on a guest. Where are you? Pete Ciccarelli. He joined us a few months back talking about MSIs, and was sort of starting to have a conversation that's sort of similar to, I think, the conversation that we're anticipating today. So I'm going to bring him on. Thanks. Hey, Pete. And so we've been talking around all of the sort of the issues about the network. First week, we're just talking about what the network's all about. And we talked about IP the following week, and then we talked about management of networks last week. And now I want to talk about the future of networks. So the structure that we actually had the very first show of this month, we were looking at this, the 7 layers a lot. And one of the ways that I was sort of looking at this is that we were talking, there were two clumps of areas that we were talking around. One is the enormous number of different technologies and new things that's going on in the connectivity and the infrastructure space, in the sort of the lower layers of the stack, everything from Wi-Fi to LoRa to different types of wireless and wired network itself, right? So that is conveying that what we're going to end up with not very far from now is ubiquitous connectivity. Try and say that.
It's easy for you to say.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, connectivity is going to be in every little corner of a building or of a space. So there's a lot of issues to do with that. There's a lot of exciting technologies that is coming for that, right? But that is that's the sort of the infrastructure, the connectivity. The other sort of thread of conversations around network is the application side of it, because the only purpose of network is to gather data or to make data move so they can go somewhere to be turned into some kind of actionable information, right? And that usually is in the application layer at the top, right? So there's these two sort of things that's going on. The value is obviously in the top, and also the fact that connectivity can go everywhere, and even the smallest sensors can now be connected, also enables different kinds of applications to happen, right? So these two things are not isolated; they actually feed off each other. And last week we were sort of learning about networks, and I think I certainly learned that even in IT, where I thought that the IT management of networks is a lot more organized. I'm not sure it was. I'm not sure it is. There's still a lot of changes, a lot of learning that's going on there. So this is going to apply here as well. How do we manage all of that? How do we manage all of the devices that's that's being connected? How do we manage all the applications and all the different sort of meaning of application that's going on? And the word that sort of came out towards the end of the session that Pete was on is the role of orchestration, which I sort of just put slap bang in the middle there as being, how do you make all of these things work? How do you make the data feed the right applications that can turn things into actionable information? Because there's going to be a lot of it. It's going to be a lot of stuff at the top, and there's going to be a lot of stuff at the bottom. And it seemed to me that listening to the IT management side of things, this is going to be a challenge in its own right, since the number of devices that we have is actually a lot more, of magnitudes more. So this is kind of how I thought it would start this dialogue, and probably would like to get Pete to chime in first, and then we can just open it up to conversation. And sort of whether this sort of way of thinking about it relates to the thoughts that you were sharing with us a few months back, and maybe other thoughts. So Pete.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. So could you touch on a little bit about the ubiquitous connectivity? Just briefly, so I can feather it into this conversation.
Yeah, one of the tendencies that one of the things that happens when we talk about networks is we talk about, 5G, isn't it wonderful? 5G can reach different things, and there are different, there is obviously 5G, the public 5G, and then there's the CBRS stuff, and then there's other wireless technologies, whether it's an ocean sort of non-energy stuff, or LoRa, and Wi-Fi, and the other sort of connectivity issues to do with IP and other wired communications. And the reason I put that there as ubiquitous is that we can spend a lot of time talking about all of those wireless technologies, right? And it is really interesting, right? But the end result out of all of that is that we get sort of connectivity to every point that we need to get connectivity for. So the connectivity itself is not the issue. Is how do you actually manage the sort of the aggregate of all of the devices and all the sensors that are connected to do something useful, rather than having a debate about LoRa versus 5G, which as engineers we can do all day long.
Yeah, so this one will last a long time in the future conversations, because to me, I'll just talk about what I'm seeing and experiencing. So I'll talk about the network side real quick, the actual infrastructure, the hardcore, fiber, stuff like that. So since the last call, I've seen a couple of things in our industry turning, especially on the data center side. So, so what I'm getting more is I looked at 2 specifications just last week I'm seeing these clients going to they want to converge EPMS and BAS. So forever now we've been, decoupling them, even air gapping them, just for every project we've done, for the big banks, for everywhere, everything's segregated, so the EPMS stays on one side and the BAS on the other side. So both specifications, there was a conversation about, can you guys design something with the throughput that will be able to handle the EPMS side, the latency on that side, and then the latency on the BAS side on a converged network. And I'm like, my head was going to explode. So, it's a whole different ball game when you're dealing with PLCs, in the sense of, the scan time, the rates, the latency has to be there. And I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm also seeing at the same time it's almost not a battle, but it's confrontational in a sense where you have like the OT networks are these folks like Symmetrics and stuff are building top to bottom from OT all the way up, you know, even, and they're addressing something that's evolving every day, which is cyber. You know, we talked about it years ago, but it's becoming more relevant because the big push in IoT has left this pile of edge controllers with no security. So, or very little. So you have folks like Symmetrics and stuff building these infrastructures, these components, both, you know, soft and hard components to apply to these. But then you have IT wanting to keep getting more and more responsible, if you will, for the network. So I'm seeing this converge of just turmoil. And it's almost ubiquitous in the sense of ubiquity. So I'm having a hard time right these days with adhering to IT standards and rules based off, you know, all their, you know, cyber specifications, their infrastructure, you have to adhere to their infrastructure, whether they're doing, you know, whatever, DNS, DHCP, reserved IPs or not, all that kind of stuff. And then their cybersecurity rules, their brute force attacks, their layers and layers of cyber. And then you have the other side where we're introducing like a Symmetrics or, you know, I'm not going to say equivalent because Jim's on the phone. There is no equivalent. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that with the backbone or the infrastructure of the network specifications. And then to see the data center converge, I had to question it. So I did a little digging. And what's happening that I'm seeing, and it started happening a couple of years ago, is there's this move to PLCs. If you haven't seen the Iberia LinkedIn, there's a move to PLCs, but it's mostly, I think personally, this is a personal opinion, I'm seeing the PLCs, what's happening is when we spec these infrastructures like data centers, and we design, or we're part of the design team to build out this infrastructure for networks, the same time they're doing the data center, they're saying, hey folks, can you give us a quote to implement or integrate our office space, if you will, not NOC related, just office space. And what they're doing is they're wanting, I just did this on a Gore plant in Delaware, and they want to use PLC for their BAS. Now Niagara supports a particular PLC for this cause because they want Niagara to be their end all be all, not their SCADA, but their end all be all, and for BAS with the PLCs. And I just thought it was super interesting that they didn't want to stick like, in ALC, which typically goes into everything. They didn't want to put automated logic or something like that in there, or Siemens or, anything like that. They wanted to use these Phoenix Contact PLCs. And I was just talking and they were like, well, we want to converge everything. We want everything to be everything now. SCADA to interact as SCADA to bring all the building automation into SCADA, to have an intermediate layer of Niagara in between for like provisioning and stuff like that. And you're thinking to yourself, just like you started out the preamble of this conversation, is how do you put all this together? So in this case, in most cases that I'm dealing with currently, it's that network infrastructure and IT versus OT bridge or gap. Who fills that? Who takes it to 75%? And then who takes the rest of the 25%, the way to the solution? What I'm finding is IT they're slowly but surely coming down in, and they want to be part of troubleshooting, they want to be part of calls. Whereas before, they want nothing to do with it. They just wanted to provide the infrastructure. And then you have people from IT world going out and building these beautiful pieces of software and components to help out the situation. And I'm just in a world of like a whirlwind now that I'm hearing the word converged again more and more and more. But the more converged we get, I'm hearing the more, how can I say it? The more spread out the devices, like you were saying in the beginning, just more spread out the devices. And it's happening all over. This is not just industrial or commercial. It's
But
happening-
you're mentioning that IT is the one, are the ones that are doing the more application side. That's what you're implying. Is that right?
No, they're doing the more the connectivity. They're involved with the connectivity.
Okay.
And then we would do the application side always, right? So, but like we're usually brought into the design phase and the implementation or execution phase and design. And it's becoming harder and harder, like you said. It's ubiquitous connectivity, but it's really hard to decipher which way the industry is going. I mean, this was the biggest transition I saw, aside from cyber getting more involved, is trying to clean up all of our implementing IoT devices everywhere with little or no security. Cyber.
So if I can just clarify, you're sort of saying that where I have ubiquitous connectivity is in the OT domain, and the applications are in the OT domain, but you're almost sort of relying for IT, who somehow got itself in the middle. Is that basically what you're saying?
No, I think they're at the data link layer, and they're becoming more influenced. They're influencing the application layer also now.
Okay.
So, you have to use all their OS or whatever, whether it's Dockers or, whether it's a Windows or, but what I'm saying is as we're trying to calm this turmoil down with, how do we make this all speak, both from the hardware side and an application side, or data link or application, it's tough because I don't know where everybody's starting and stopping. Like I said, we can turnkey something like Symmetrix putting out and take you from the bottom to the top, and vice versa. But it's, they already have the infrastructure, so they say, in place to handle all this. Well, we're noticing they don't. And really they're really learning as they go. So that's what we're seeing, a big pushback on OT now, where we didn't see it a couple of years ago. We're seeing a big pushback on even at the switch, the basic network switch layer, at the switches. We're seeing them wanting to put their own. We offered up, we did some other vendor switches and a couple of projects, some big projects, just some single mode fiber with some, good, nice switches and stuff like that. And they don't want them anymore. They want to use theirs. And, they want to manage all the spanning tree stuff that's going on with redundancy and ring networks and stuff like that.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
So they're just creeping over the last, I'd say 8 years. They've been creeping more and more into our area. Now they're really on the EPMS side, which I didn't realize. So I don't know if they're treading carefully or they're testing the waters, but I'm noticing that all these vendors come out with this great OT stuff, and building on the OT, almost take care of both sides of the fence. And IT, go ahead.
Pete, a couple questions for you, if I could.
Go ahead.
Yeah, on the IT, are you seeing does the IT people you're talking to, are they good about segregating traffic? In other words, do they think that the traditional IT traffic and the OT traffic somehow has to coexist on the same wire?
Yeah,
if you will.
Yeah, and this is where I keep beating it up, but Symmetrix has for the UDP traffic, nobody likes UDP, right?
Yeah.
It's a big bear who's very hungry and will eat up your network quicker than you can blink an eye. So they'll like to keep at least the UDP stuff, like the BACnet and all that, on a different segment if they can. But a lot of vendors, not just Alberio, but a lot of vendors are mashing them. They're throwing everything at it. They need to get done.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm raising it, because that, whether it's a cyber issue or it's a bandwidth issue, or both, that's really problematic. And then the second point is, are they starting to recognize that the sheer volume of IP devices that are coming into our space, because as you know, all the 485 stuff is moving up to IP now, and relative to PC servers, even to some extent phones, we're going to dwarf the IP count in a large building relative to the IP count from IT devices. Do they appreciate what was about to happen?
Yeah, I mean, IPv6 is going to help that, right? So, and everybody's beefed up, years ago to start going with IPv6. But yeah, I think everybody, even myself, is very comfortable with the amount of devices that are IP based. But I think that the throughput, the utilization, the latency, all those keywords are my issue. I don't think it's going to be a count per se. Now, when you move over to the second part of this conversation with the wireless and stuff like that, that's where you're going to come into the count. The counts are going to count.
Yeah, I just know that in the IT world, when they talk about managing networks, they have a certain expectation in mind in terms of the number of devices they're managing, and all of a sudden it's going to explode on them, and then they're going to be like, well, we don't have the time and the budget to do all this, and what is this stuff anyway?
Right.
So that's my concern.
Yeah, so like people, again, like Symmetrix came up with this router, right? So what it does is you can do whatever you want. You can run a Class C, subnet, 200 something, and you can, litter that all over the OT network and then push out the one subnet, on the IP side. So that's what I'm seeing evolving, is to cut down on that subnet, those subnets, because you're right, in a sense, because you can't put like a Class A subnet, with 65,535 devices on there, and and mix UDP and regular TCP/IP, transport protocol data. It gets cumbersome, and the troubleshooting, forget about it. You might as well just give it up. Yeah. So yeah, they don't want to do that. They don't like that. They can't, it's a bad maintenance thing for IT. So yeah, to be able to get our OT networks to, conform to the IT by taking, a whole network and, worth of different subnets and then pushing them to one single IT network, like Symmetrix is doing with their router, that's the kind of solutions I'm personally looking for.
So first off, I'd like to thank Pete for talking about my product so much. But I would like to point out that this is the beginning of a product line and a technology for the industry, which we call managed BACnet systems, which is supposed to span this problem. This is just the starting point, but eventually this box and other things like BACnet firewall routers, which will go between BACnet Secure Connect and BACnet IP and other things, are designed to be managed in such a way that IT can enjoy the management structure for their systems while not interfering or not having to be responsible, should I say, for what goes on the building side. So we're, as an industry, not just Symmetrix, but the whole ASHRAE and BACnet contingent with this technology called managed BACnet systems is going in the direction to try to solve that problem.
I'm glad that you said that, Jim. I wanted to chime in. What I'm hearing sounds like a today problem, not a future of connectivity problem issue. I would assume that we wouldn't be having these exact same conversations 5 years from now, let alone 10 years from now. All of that will get worked out and figured out technically and business wise. Do you guys agree with that, or is this there's overwhelming obstacle to us getting online with everything?
And that's the intent for today, is to talk about that. Right. There is a mess, let's call it there, and Pete has sort of explained it really well, right? It is a mess today. It's difficult to do today, but how are we thinking about the future of
Yeah, so if we assume that that will get worked out by some really smart people like Jim Lee and Symmetrics at some point, and Pete, then what? What does that mean for our industry, right? I think in previous sessions, we've talked about some of the stuff that Pete's outlining here has been what's holding us back and or slowing things down in terms of, ubiquitous connectivity. But assuming we work out the technical issues and so forth, what does that do to our industry at that point? That's what I think is really kind of interesting.
And I'm going to sort of channel my Mark Peacock, who's in Kansas City this week for BOMA, of saying, we're talking about networks, right? So Mark would say, what is the objective? What are we trying to do with a network? So doesn't that argument then start at the top of this, which is really where we exist, where humans exist, where applications exist, in terms of we're trying to do something, we're trying to optimize energy, or we're trying to make it comfortable, whatever it is. Should we look at the network as being something that should satisfy a particular human's intent? Is that, or is that too abstract?
Probably a bit abstract, because you could argue that, and someone told me this the other day, which I thought was fun. We were talking about dashboards and information to users and stuff, and he remembered the old days when we used to do melamine boards with red and green LEDs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the underlying connectivity thing is changing the way in what we present and all that sort of stuff. The quality of the data and the possibilities of the data is changing significantly, right, as a result. So, if you just focused on, just the application piece, this is what we could deliver. Then yeah, a board with some LEDs would do the job. Is that good enough? No, because we can do a lot better these days with the data that we're getting. So we were kind of talking about this on the Wednesday call, right? There's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. If I had ubiquity of data and wireless and easy and fast, that changes the sort of applications and things that I can deliver in the process, right? So that's a little bit like my favorite saying. If you ask the market, that's just say faster horses, when they wanted a car in the first place.
Yeah, this whole question when we were talking about the other day reminded me of a conversation I had with Mike Markkula once. You guys might recognize that name. He was one of the early investors in Apple there. And the founder, by the way, the money and force to create Echelon in LawnWorks networking technology. And I asked him, how did that come about? And his response was kind of interesting. He said, we used to do this fun thing at lunch, and with a whiteboard, we would ask what if questions. And one day somebody said, this was at Apple, what if networking was ubiquitous and it was free and there were no charges, and the chips were small enough and fast enough and smart enough to put one on every light bulb and every light switch and every outlet everywhere? What would the world look like then? How would it change? And to me, that's the interesting sort of take on this. How is our industry going to be different, assuming we get all these issues and obstacles that we've been talking about solved here over the next few years? What will it look like? We've talked a lot about these islands of automation coming from the IoT world. Pete mentioned the security nightmare it's creating, having all these, kind of free range gateways, for lack of a better term, out there. So what happens when all of that gets under control, and what does our world look like then?
Yeah, and I think you maybe touched on something super important to me, Tracy, is so it's the age-old thing since smart buildings evolved. I've gotten this a couple of times, not as many as you would think. Hey, how is Albireo going to make my building smarter? And that's where it all comes down to what you just explained. So I see the future as that latter part that you just were describing, is that we're going through this phase. It's a transient time, right? It's going to change. So it's just making up for, you know, we or the industry has created all these widgets, let's call them widgets, spread throughout, and they're getting smarter, but they're not getting smarter at the pace like the Microsoft and stuff like, and your residential stuff, right? So what's happening is we're still dealing with this, you know, this excess baggage, if you will, trying to get these things to communicate as they're getting smarter and smarter. The future I see is almost what Tracy's describing, is the networking will not be an issue for two reasons. One, because it will be ubiquitous, right? And two, because the devices will be, you know, will end up being smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. So, you know, when you communicate with a device, you're asking for help. I need this data from you so I can do my job, right? So it's learning. So the more and more that we communicate, integrate, whatever you think, these software engineers and stuff, they're going to come up with it. Well, we can just do that on our own. So these devices, these shards, as you call them, that they're actually going to get smarter and smarter and more compact. And you're not, it's not going to, this entity or widget's not going to have to reach out through a gateway or reach out to go grab this data, because it can grab it from anywhere it wants now. So, you know, it's always going to be the point where the integrator's obsolete. I mean, it's just going to be a plug and play. I'm hoping, I've been hoping that since you know, since Ovis.
That is a perfect point, and I'm glad that you brought that up about, you know, changing our industry, right?
Yeah.
Are we talking about cutting a whole layer of our deployment, you know, infrastructure out of this whole thing? When you think even about, you know, Anto's always talking about cloud native, where everything is just directly connecting, communicating to the cloud, right? Does that mean that integration of a BAS system at that point becomes, you know, cloud integration, not historical integration that we think of, for instance?
Tracy, I'd like to correct you a little bit. Cloud native doesn't say that you're talking to the cloud all the time. Cloud native says that you're talking to other things as if you're talking to the cloud all the time, right? You may not be talking to the cloud. You may be talking to your neighbor,
Peer-to-peer.
Peer-to-peer, but you're using the same.
I always think of it as
right, but
all
that's
of that communication and data is being captured and shared somewhere in a cloud.
no, it's being done using the same techniques.
It's not technology, yeah.
That you
Okay.
would to the cloud. That's
All right. Yep. That's fine. Expand that thinking then, right? Where is that still sounds like integration to me, as opposed to
well,
like premise integration.
well, it should be. I mean, to get to the plug and play that Pete was talking about, it should be interoperation, right? You should be able to, using some cloud native mechanism, discover that thing that you didn't even know about that happened to be in the next room, or it could be in the cloud. You don't care.
So on a local network, you have the same ability. on the
No, that is
local-
on the network. There's no local versus cloud network with cloud native. It's all one network. So it doesn't matter where the other end is. I just say I want the, you know, the utility rate for right now, or for 1 hour from now. And you should be able to ask that. And whether it's a device next to you on the same network, or a device something in the cloud, should just respond to you and give you that information, because that's what you need to do your stuff.
Yeah, and the micros, go ahead, Roger.
No, sorry, Roger, go ahead.
You're muted, Roger. You're muted, Roger.
And are you saying that physically it may not all be connected, but it appears to be on a flat network per se,
Correct.
because you can get the data from anywhere, even though physically it's not structured in that
Correct.
same way.
And
Like
that's,
like
but
the
I'll
internet.
argue that a minute. So physically speaking, that is a logical distinction. There is physical networking, wiring, integration that needs to occur at some level. And even discovering whether that thing is local or that thing is somewhere else in the world, you know, unless it happens to be on the local segment, you're going through the cloud.
No,
some cloud servers, if not being, I'm not saying it's storing data or cloud to cloud API. It could be device to device binding directly, but through a connection that's made through cloud servers that are hosted elsewhere, right?
well, you're trying to dissect what actually happens, right? I'm
Yep,
trying to,
that's-
I'm
that's
trying to abstract
part
a
of
little bit, but not too much.
Okay,
Right, to be able to say that if a device or an application needs some information, right, in a cloud environment where everything from devices to the cloud are connected using the same tools, then you should just be able to say, give me this information, please.
yes, I
And if you
understand.
have the right to do it from security perspective, you should get it. And it should operate as Roger's saying, as a big flat network. If you think about the internet that way, the internet is one big flat network. It really isn't, because there's NATs and data centers and all sorts of things. But I can email anybody and I can ping any entity, and the
Right.
internet should be the same level of flatness.
So back to the original, I think, topic, does that eliminate system integrators from the equation?
Well, actually, I wanted to go one dimension before you answer that, and that's the ubiquity of the connectivity doesn't necessarily imply interoperability per se, right? I think interoperability is further up a little bit, and that's a,
In the stack?
and we've had all the discussions last year too about, you can do ubiquity of connectivity and have interoperability just through proprietary APIs, because it is easy these days, right? You don't have to have stuff. And so in that context, Tracy, weirdly enough, I actually think system integrators and master system integrators are even more needed, because we've kind of migrated away from openness per se at all levels, right? I mean, there are standards like BACnet and LON still in place, but there's a lot of other stuff that, BACnet doesn't apply to, and system integrators still have to deal with that.
Interoperability at a higher layer in the stack instead of a physical layer.
Right.
Yeah, and
And-
you're gonna get that so that's what's happening. Instead of going from the bottom, Tracy, it seems to me like integrators aren't going away. I think the very future, like we were just talking about, there might not be a need. You get something in your mail, you plug it in and you get it working, you go to the job site and they throw it in there. But it's starting at the top. And a couple of years ago, like Amazon and stuff, instead of just calling out for a virtual machine, I need a VM, I want to run whatever. So what they did was they're taking the server world where everybody ran as an appliance, for example, right? Niagara, everybody ran as an appliance. We were just running somewhere in Colorado. That was the only difference between on-prem and off-prem, pretty much. But the Amazons and the Microsoft, they're doing microservices now. So keep your ear for that. They broke down the VM into services. So this service talks to this service on Google. Google talks to Microsoft on this service. It might be analytics service. It might be this microservice. And then what we did is we started taking this technology and putting it in our controllers. E.g., the Distech controller, the Eclipse controller has the Docker containers in it. So what they do is they just plug a Docker container in this thing, and it automatically reaches out to its VM or whatever and starts talking and does everything. And it's going to be to the part where you're just going to place your Docker, microservice into a container that might be running 4 or 5, and you're just hanging off that thing like just another entity doing your own thing. I think, Jim, didn't you guys put microservice in one of your products?
We are doing that in the future, not in there yet, Pete, but
Yeah,
we're
so-
looking at an architecture that we're working on with Anto and a whole larger group from C4SB called the IBB. Anto, you want to give a 2-second plug for Pete on that?
Yeah, Pete, what you've just described is the IBB, the interoperable building blocks, and the idea of the IBB is to create an open standard for a containerization environment in which containers containing applications could be installed and operate.
Yeah, we're
Seconds.
basically,
Yeah,
we're trying to keep,
seconds.
we're trying to keep a proprietary lock from developing on how people do containers, because it's such a open interoperable thing already. We figure if we can get the industry together up front and standardize that, it'll nip in the bud people trying to create a platform to do that function, Pete.
Yeah, and I think it's starting from the top with stuff like that. I'm a big fan of the Docker. There's other free ones out there that you can utilize to, to create these containers and stuff like that. But I'm a big fan of Docker. The industry seems to be moving towards the Docker containers more so than others.
Yeah, it looks like the IBB will spec Docker, but we're still working through that. And the other point about integrators is that I'm not sure that integrators will go away, because for one thing, they need to deal with the business reasons. Why do you want something to happen the way it wants to happen, right? Which is really more of a consultative relationship with the owner than the technical stuff. Right now, they have to do everything, including all the way down to the technical stuff, but it's quite likely that integrators in the future will be actually most of the value will be delivered in the consultative side of things.
More at the application level. The subject matter expert becomes more and more important.
And I think you're seeing that in the UK, right, Roger? That's the trend.
Yeah, no, and the application is beginning to segregate where you've got people doing the application at a lower level, but the MSI is taking on a lot more of the responsibilities from top to bottom as a consultant to virtually everybody in the chain, just to make sure it's going including the owner and the consultant, because someone has to know how to do the whole kind of thing from top to bottom, and there's not a lot of those skills out there still at the moment.
I like Daniel's perspective, Daniel's perspective on the chat about, weirdly enough, that means that the user experience should actually become simpler and more simplified as far as what they want to do, but the work behind it will probably be more complex in doing so. And things like IBB are going to help solve those things, right?
There are
The
parallels.
the complexities can get sort of embedded in tools or standardized things like IBB.
Right, exactly.
As is the case with the internet. There's a lot of complication in the internet, but we just send email to each other.
Right. There are parallels out there that have sort of light a pathway to where I think we're going in the industry, right? When you talk about the plug and play stuff that you see at a consumer level, for instance, and how easy it is to get on and make cell calls, for instance, right? Worldwide connectivity instantaneously. So I think there are a lot of things historically in our industry that have followed the IT world. This is another one that needs to go that way, right?
So guys, what I'm hearing, starting with what Pete was laying out, is that more than ever, we need to become friends with IT.
Yeah.
It's, segregating ourselves and living in our own bubble, which we've done a pretty good job of for decades now. That's not going to work for many reasons.
I agree with you, Steve, though. I think one of the problems is that when you say that, we have to work with IT. I'm not sure everybody is on the same page as what the definition of IT is.
Yeah, I was going to say there's different levels of definitions of who that IT is, right? I mean,
because Pete's perspective, listening to what he was saying earlier, was really the IT networking group,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then there's probably a different IT group that's responsible for applications, business applications.
Oh, there's another for cyber, right? And
there is. You're absolutely right. So I'm not trying to limit it to one thing or another, but in particular, networking is in many respects is where it all starts, right? So it's probably the most important thing. And what Jim, it's first time I've had a chance to hear you comment a little bit about managed BACnet, and which is good because the way it's being approached is to really convert or to take the traditional BACnet network and make it appear and function in an IT fashion, right? So that the IT networking group can manage it in a more familiar way, right? I mean, that's what's going to come out of that, which is really good. And then in parallel, all of the wireless stuff that's going on is only going to continue, from what I can see, to become more and more ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And the value proposition from an installation standpoint is huge, right? Just a lot less wire and cable and conduit that's going to need to be run. And that has tremendous value from a cost standpoint. Because we certainly, when 20% of the industry only has BAS, and we talk about why that is, cost is a big factor. So if we can deploy wireless devices for a fraction of the installed cost, that's going to allow our industry to expand. And Tracy's already was telling us about that just on our Wednesday call, how effective it's showing up in his industry. So, but at the end of the day, all this data is coming through as IP, and we need to. And my feeling is that we just absolutely need to follow the curve. The spec work we're doing with IBB makes a whole lot of sense. Just keep our foot, on the metal here, because that's where we need to go as an industry.
You made me think of something else, Steve, which is, why are IT people involved at all?
Mhm.
When we get to a certain point, and right now it's because they're bringing the dial tone to us, so to
Right.
speak, right? But in the world of IBB and connectivity through other means like satellite or cellular or things like that, we don't need the IT people involved at all, right? IBBs are out there, connected and available to be communicated with.
That's a great point, because that's the whole sort of notion of cloud native, is that when we architecture the networks so that it is cloud native, so that it mimics how the cloud works, right? Then we're effectively replicating how IT systems work,
Mhm.
right? But then we still have to manage it. We still have to manage this stuff that's now ours, right? So Jim is doing that in the BACnet space, as we've talked about. But there are still things that needs to be managed up above.
Right.
Just because you're getting all your 5G from a certain wireless vendor that's really great, that provides you nice bills and security and everything else, does not mean that it can be managed to your needs of whatever the application is. That's a different thing. That's what I'm trying to separate.
So do they become more of a, the IT department become more of a consultant than anything else? Because, when stuff has moved out, their job, to the cloud, their job diminished sort of overnight from all the stuff they used to be responsible for on-prem has gone somewhere else. But someone, as you're saying, is still needed.
Yep.
To actually, for the customer or the client, whoever it is, to actually pull all this stuff together.
Yeah, there's some unanswered things at the application, closer to the application layer still in this whole thing. I mean, even something simple like if something requires data storage, where does that happen? How does that happen? Who's responsible?
So the technology says that with cloud native, you can store it anywhere you want, right? From a technology perspective. But then that asks the question, where should it be stored so that you can get it for your application needs? And where should it be stored for governance, for security, privacy, and a whole bunch of other stuff?
And then who's going to manage it and secure it and
Right.
all that other pieces that go with it.
We'll probably go full circle and be right back at Microsoft, AWS, and Google again at that point.
Okay, so
I don't know, but I found these results on search.
See, Siri will manage it for us. That's who will manage it.
So I was going to wrap it up, because it's going to start to wrap up. Pete, do you want to make some closing comments? What you've heard here?
No, this is all good stuff. It's super interesting to me to be able to converse like this about this kind of thing. These things I think about every day, but I'm just trying to chase my tail half the time, just trying to figure out what others are doing. But this is really good stuff. The only thing I'd like to just conclude with is the native cloud stuff is really becoming more relevant. And then the last thing is the IT. We should be friends with the IT. I wish that would happen. I mean, we're actually building out, for pretty substantial clients, we're building out more so than ever. We're building out temporary networks, and then there's this migration to the client side network that's already stood up. Now you have to adhere to their principles. I wish for once it'd be the opposite way, the inverse of that, where they say, what are you guys doing down there? What are you guys, what are you expecting from us? What are you looking for from a cyber aspect? And, bring the whole team in, talk from top to bottom, but that never happened. And I wish
Until
it was,
later.
until you start dropping their network. And, we just had this happen. Well, not us, another vendor, I'm not going to say any names. We're riding on the same converged network. They took down their whole WAP. They couldn't log in with their phones or anything. And, who's going to pointing the fingers at us because we reside there. Just because we're in the DHCP pool doesn't mean that we're the problem. But yeah, we got the fingers pointed at it. But I really, really wish that IT would start coming down into our world to just take a look around.
So you'll know when we've arrived, when the first words out of an IT guy's mouth is, how can I help?
Yeah.
Right.
At the top, you don't even meet them. You don't even see these guys. They're not even really around.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's all I got. I'm so happy to be here. Anytime. I love. I should make more of these. It's really nice to talk to other people in the industry, get different point of views. Super, super, super valuable.
Well, thank you very much for your
Thank you,
perspective.
Pete.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
It's great.
Been great. And thanks everybody for being here, panelists and the audience. We'll get a video out tomorrow or Wednesday, and otherwise have a great week and have a great Independence Day next week.
Indeed.
Guys,
We'll
enjoy
see
next
you
week.
on July.
Hey, guys.
Bye-bye.
Adios.